Assalamu alaikum. How are you all? Some of you might know the gentleman sitting to my left. We are in the kingdom of achievements, which, by the way, I think, having worked in advertising and brand for 25 plus years, is a very clear-headed and accurate positioning for a country, and most countries don't have a positioning at all, so I think it's very appropriate. And connected to that, having someone who's had so many achievements, might struggle with who he is when he's not achieving. We're going to find out all about that. So obviously I have Stephen Bartlett here. He's a trailblazer in the business and media world, renowned for his innovative leadership, visionary insights, and candid approach to personal and professional growth. As the co-founder of Social Chain, and more recently Flight Studio and Third Web, Stephen built one of the most influential social media agencies globally and is on a mission to disrupt both the podcasting and blockchain landscapes. Through his hit podcast, The Diary of a CEO, who's watched, listened, absorbed it, clap. And his role as a judge on Dragon's Den, Stephen has become a voice for a new generation of entrepreneurs. In this conversation, we delve into unlocking success, exploring his views on innovation, leadership, and strategies for exponential growth in today's ever-evolving landscape. Stephen, pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you, Mark. That was very, very kind. Thank you to everybody. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Stephen, how does it feel to be so successful?
It's not something that necessarily has ever crossed my mind, especially not in such a way. I don't consider myself to be so successful. And that's not like a cliche, fluffy answer. It's just, it's never, that's not a thought that's ever crossed my mind. There's a lot I'm grateful for. And I can talk about, feeling grateful for so much of my life. But success is like and I think it should be, a set of objectives that continue to move off into the future, right? Mm-hmm. And I think all of us need something to strive for. So I guess success is the journey itself. It's the how you feel on a consistent basis day to day. Do you feel sufficiently challenged? Do you have freedom and control over your life? Are you working with people that you like? Do you feel connected, socially connected? Do you have a sense of forward motion to a goal that matters to you? I guess that is success. It's the motion that is success. Okay. So do I feel successful? In my life right now, I do, because I have those 5 things. But I don't view it as a destination that I'm ever going to arrive at, per se.
Slightly deep question as a second question. When you look back at your life and you look at the phases of success and failure, are there clear phases, probably based on age, that strike you when you look back now?
Yeah, and I think a lot about, I'm going to have kids someday, so I'm going to advise them on how to think about life. And we don't often like to talk about it, but I do think that age does factor in, because age changes your risk profile under the assumption that you have less obligations. So I think of the first season of life from 20 to 30 as really being your own university, where your risk profile should be much higher. And you should be taking bigger risks, because the objective in that season of life is to optimize for knowledge and skills. And then I think of the 30s that I'm in now as a time where you apply those knowledge and skills to missions and goals that are subjectively meaningful to you. So the first season of my life was a lot of high-risk behavior, naive high-risk behavior. But because it was so high risk and it was so naive, and I took really, really big bets, I came out at about 21 years old, leaving my job, in a place where my knowledge and skills were so deep and relevant. And when I say deep and relevant, the word relevant is so important, because you don't just want to go and fail at anything. You want to go fail and attain that knowledge and skills in an area where the wave is coming into shore.
Okay.
Like if I'd gone out and attained knowledge and skills in the discipline of print media, it might not necessarily have yielded dividends when I was 22, 23, 24, but I went out and attained knowledge and skills on a wave that was coming into shore, which was social media back then.
Okay.
So at 21 years old, I was paid $70,000 a month because I had this set of knowledge and skills. I hadn't succeeded in it, but I was experienced in it.
Okay. think back to your 20s,
Yeah.
80% of Saudi Arabia is under 30, correct?
Oh, wow.
What were the 3 biggest bets you placed in your 20s?
Yeah, so the biggest single bet was, I guess, leaving university to go and fail in a startup. And I think it's, but not just any startup, a social media technology startup. And again, it goes back to what I was saying a second ago. If I had a kid now and my kid was 18 years old, I would be telling them to go to an AI startup, and really irrespective of whether you thought it was going to succeed or not, you want to be in an AI startup because AI is about to transform the world. So any skills and knowledge and experience you get from being in close proximity to the failure, which is why I say startup, is going to set you up for the next 10, 20 years of your life. So it's all about pick a surfboard, get on a wave that's coming into shore, and just optimize for knowledge and skills, not outcome, not resources, not even network, and not even reputation. Optimize for knowledge and skills. And then that is, for me, career longevity.
Okay. The most optimistic part of that is that in this imagined future, you have an 18-year-old listening to you.
Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. Second big bet you placed in your 20s.
Second big bet I placed in my 20s would be moving geographically to the room where it happens. And this is just a phrase I use with my team sometimes, which is just getting to a city where things are going on. Because I was sat with Reid Hoffman, who's the founder of LinkedIn, last week, and he was saying to me that we were discussing that where you're geographically located has a tremendous impact on your long-term future. So getting to some of the big cities where things are really happening disproportionately impacts your outcomes and who you're going to know, the networks you're going to build. And again, over the span of a lifetime, it's those networks and that knowledge that are ultimately going to define you. So I moved from the countryside in Devon and Plymouth, which is, there's really not much going on there, especially in terms of technology. I moved up to Manchester, and then I moved to London, then I moved to New York. And then I spent about a year in San Francisco. So I got out into a major city, which is critical.
Okay. Third big bet.
Third big bet.
In your 20s.
In my 20s. So I would say it's kind of a bit of a catch-all, but it was more of a mentality to the word no, which is I sent lots of cold emails to lots of people asking for very big things. And 1 in 20 of those cold emails changed my life consistently. I just said I had a bias towards saying yes to opportunities and putting myself in the firing line to get a no. And I think in your early 20s, you really want to be saying yes to things. Even if you don't understand how it's necessarily going to feed into your goals, you have to have a bias towards saying yes. And in this season of my life, I have a bias towards saying no. And I think that's critical. And I can think of moments where I got an email. I was 18 years old. I was basically shoplifting food to feed myself in that room in Rusholme. And the email said, do you want to come to London tomorrow on a megabus? Some kid has dropped out. We need someone to come and speak at this event. I said yes. I got on a megabus, which I couldn't afford. The driver let me on, went to London, spoke at this event, and then had I not done that, I wouldn't have got my first 3 investors, because by the time I'd got off stage, there was a queue of people waiting on the side of the stage who wanted to talk to me, believed in me, wanted to invest in me. And I can tell you a bunch of other things that I did that came to nothing, but the thing is, when you're in that situation, rolling the dice and getting a bad hand leaves you in the same situation. So you should be rolling the dice as much as possible. But because of this strange loss aversion belief, which is we're so scared of losing something, even when that thing could just literally be our own ego or status, we don't tend to take a lot of bets. My whole, from about 18 to 21 was marked by asking a lot of people for a lot of things. Panasonic asked them for £10,000 worth of camera equipment. They said yes, they delivered it to my house for free. What you don't see is I also sent that email to 20 other people, and they said no, or ignored me. And that's the story of that season of my life, which was rolling the dice as much as I possibly could, because I had, frankly, nothing to lose.
So as you get older, the shoplifting part of your story is part of your story.
Yeah.
How do you feel saying that out loud? Because you have to reconcile with the fact that you're committing crime. You're obviously super responsible and generous now. How do you feel acknowledging that part of your history?
I acknowledge it just because I'm sure it's just the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
My parents weren't speaking to me because I dropped out of university. I had 4 overdrafts. I had 2 CCJs, which is a county court judgment. You get that, it stays on your record for about 6 or 7 years. I had no food. And if you've ever been in a situation where you have no food and there's no conceivable way of you getting any food, there's no person you can call, You've put your hands down the back of the sofas, you've looked around on the floor, you've been into restaurants and try to see if there's any pound coins down the side. You eventually get to the point where your stomach is in so much pain that you resort to taking the food to keep yourself alive. And it's just the nature of my story. I could erase it and pretend it didn't happen, but I don't think that would be necessarily useful, because to assume and to portray the idea that it didn't come with some sacrifice is like deceptive, and it'll be difficult. You know, in there I just named a few things, right? My mother didn't speak to me for almost 2 years when I dropped out of university. Are you willing to go through that? Are you willing to go through potential financial hardship? Are you willing to make yourself look stupid? Are you willing to be embarrassed? Now, these are all the questions that you'll all face, irrespective of what challenge you pursue, especially if it's a big challenge, because there is no other way. There is no other way to build a big business or podcast or write a book if you're not willing to contend with everything I've just said. And everything that people know me for is a direct consequence of embarrassment, of being bad at something, of doing it publicly, of shame, of financial hardship. And I always ask people, I say, you know, think about anyone you admire in your life, and think about what you admire them for. Maybe a celebrity, maybe a singer, maybe an entrepreneur, maybe someone that writes books or makes Instagram quotes. And then I'd ask you just to think about day one, the first day. Like, think about the first day. People know me now for posting my ideas on the internet. They buy my book. I post quotes a lot. But imagine the first day that I posted a quote. And just imagine me sat with my boys. We're all like football fans. And then one of my friends sees that I've posted a quote, quoted by me, on my own Instagram. And it says, like, I don't know, everything happens for a reason, Stephen Bartlett. And imagine my friends turning to me thinking, who the hell do you think you are? Do you think you're like Mahatma Gandhi or something? You think you're like some wise guy? Imagine day one, and imagine how embarrassing that is, to shed old identities, old perceptions, potentially old friends, in the pursuit of some kind of dream. It's just the only way there. So you have to make the decision, what matters more? Your certainty and your comfort and everything you have now, or are you willing to bet that on another life? And some of you are. Some of you are willing to take the embarrassment, the shame, and the difficulty, but some of you won't be. So you'll just procrastinate. You'll continually talk about your plans, and you'll never do anything about it. And I'm surrounded by people like that. It's a choice you get to make.
Let's talk about innovation now. It's a big word. Can you give me your definition of innovation in a sentence or two?
I think what comes to mind when you ask me that is creating something new by connecting pre-existing things in new ways. Kind of think that would be my definition of it. Yeah.
Hold that thought. Now, I want you to think back to some of the clients you had in the early days of the agency. What got in the way of them innovating?
So many things. So many things. So the big thing is I'd say, so loss aversion comes to mind, which is this psychological phenomenon that was made famous by a guy called Daniel Kahneman. And put simply, if I drop $10 on the floor and I lose it, the pain of losing $10 isn't made up for by me just finding $10 on the floor. As human beings, we'd need to find $20 or $30 to make up for the loss of 10. And this speaks to something that's quite innate in all of us, which is losing something that we have right now really, really hurts. And so when you think about this in the context of a business, if your business is doing really well, like many of my clients were, if we come to them with something that is a risk, an experiment, they have to contend with the idea that they're going to lose something in the pursuit of the unknown. And humans don't typically like to do that. Only humans who understand the bigger picture. And the bigger picture here is something that the greatest founders and entrepreneurs intuitively understand, which is if you don't take risks in business and in your personal life, that ends up being your biggest risk. And in fact, it's hard in foresight to understand which experiment or innovation is going to pay off. So the game isn't to be really, really good at predicting it. It's merely to do what Jeff Bezos at Amazon does, which is to run more experiments. Because Jeff says it's the 1 in 10 that will pay for the graveyard. I.e., one of these experiments in the next 10 experiments I do will pay for the other 9. And at AWS, that is AWS. At Amazon, that's AWS, which I think will make them roughly $100 billion this year. It was an experiment, but it pays for the Fire Phone, which failed. It pays for Endless.com, which failed. And his thinking is, if you don't do these experiments, if you don't pursue these innovations, then you'll be left at the very end of your corporate existence with some kind of Hail Mary bet. You'll have to do something extreme at the end. So that's the most important thing. It's that loss aversion.
Can you give me two more? So we got loss aversion, give me two more.
Things that prevent people from innovating is, bureaucracy is kind of tied into that, which is how quickly it takes an organization to make a decision and make a bet. Because even if you have some kind of insight or you have some kind of hypothesis as to, if we launch a cloud hosting platform, it might work. What I saw in most of the time when I was running an agency business is even if two people had the same idea, in one case, this business I always talk about, $1 billion company run by, one department's run by the father, one brand, and one brand is run by the son, we would take them both the same idea. Now, the father would wait for 9 months. He would ask for the procurement team to take a look at it, the lawyers to take a look at the contract. He'd wait for someone to be getting back from holiday or annual leave, and 9 months would pass. The son would say to me, he would interrupt me halfway through my presentation, and he would call his team in and say, we are doing this now. He wouldn't care about the fee. I don't actually recall us ever having a contract. And between our companies, we transacted about $5 million. Didn't care about that. What he understood is that the biggest cost as it relates to innovation and business is the time you waste trying to decide whether to run the experiment or not. And as Jeff Bezos famously said, there's really two types of decisions in life. Type 1 decisions, which are doors that you can walk back through. They are irreversible and low consequence. And there's type 2 decisions, which are doors that if you're wrong, you can't get back through. They are high consequence and irreversible. Jeff says that most decisions in business are type 1 decisions, but we treat them like type 2 decisions. So in the face of a type 1 decision, a reversible low consequence decision, you should make it as fast as you can. Don't try and get to 100% certainty. Get to 51% certainty and make the decision, because failure becomes feedback, feedback becomes knowledge, and knowledge becomes your power.
Now, you're relatively familiar with Saudi Arabia. I have a working theory, which is that Saudi Arabia, from what I can tell, having spoken to tens of people here, is Saudi Arabia thinks big, acts fast, gets what it wants. Can you go too quickly?
Yes. But again, there's so much nuance to say here, but I actually think the bigger risk is going too slowly most of the time.
Okay.
And again, you have to separate the types of decisions, right? Because you need feedback, and the only way to get feedback is to run the experiment. So if you sit in a boardroom and you're a nation state, for example, and you're thinking about a project for or an initiative for 12 months, you're much better off just starting the initiative and figuring out if there's some kind of test you can run to get the feedback than sitting around talking. As it relates to nations, a lot of the decisions are type 2 decisions. They're irreversible and high consequence. And in those cases, I'd be trying to seek more certainty. I'd be trying to get to like 80% certainty. But if it's low consequence and potentially reversible, i.e. it's not going to cost us that much money as a nation, and if we're wrong about this assumption, we could just turn it back, I'd be looking at trying to get to 51% certainty.
Okay.
And this is what Barack Obama, I spoke in Brazil where Barack Obama spoke. I was on after him. And he was talking about the biggest decisions he had to make as president. And he said he was talking about that decision to fly those Apache helicopters into Pakistan at nighttime with two sort of squadrons of American troops. He goes, in those big decisions, I didn't get 100% certainty.
Yeah.
You have to get to 51% and make the decision with the peace of mind that I made it with the best available information. Because 100% certainty, which is what most people try and get to, only exists in hindsight.
It's interesting because also within the experiment concept that you're talking about, there's design thinking applied to a nation state, which I think is super interesting. Let's talk about leadership now. How would you hope that your team describes you as a leader?
I would hope they describe me as being kind, but not necessarily nice. I don't really care about being nice, because I think nice is toxic in business. Nice is telling people what they want to hear.
Yeah.
Whereas kind is telling them what they need to hear to achieve their objectives. And I also don't want to work with nice people. And the distinction is really important. That niceties is like I'm actually protecting my own ego and I care more about being liked. Whereas kindness is I care more about your success and the success of this company. I'd say that they think I'm obsessive around detail. I'd say that they think I work on a lot of things at the same time, so I context switch a lot. I'd say that they think I am quite in my head a lot. I'd say that they think I'm an introvert, and that I'm obsessed. I'm probably really driven by principles.
Okay.
Like everything in my businesses is about principles. So these like first principles. So experimentation, failure, sweating the small stuff, these kinds of principles. And I love that about business because you don't really need to rely on tactics or strategies.
Yep.
You can just rely on underlying principles. Like one of them is like increase our rate of experimentation or failure. So we built a failure and experimentation team who I was just backstage talking to for, that's the kind of, I think about principles.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Have you realized any of your own epiphanies about your own leadership style in the past year or two? Just one.
Epiphanies.
Epiphanies, revelations, something that's changed the way that you think you need to deal with the world and how you need to behave. Yes, I'm buying your time.
I mean, one of them that's just become really clear and has grown in clarity over time is just that leaders are inconsistent, and they should be inconsistent. I've interviewed 7 or 8 of Sir Alex Ferguson's former players, and every single one of them tells me that he treated them all differently. And that makes logical sense, because if you're a different individual, the jigsaw piece that completes you should be a completely different shape. And I think there's a narrative in leadership that you should be this consistent leader, but I treat all the individuals I work with entirely differently based on who they are and how I think they're motivated. And this is a broader point, I guess, about every team member you have has a different personal why. They have like their own personal ideology. And if you want to get the best out of them, it's not like the company's vision that's going to motivate them. It's their own personal ideology. So if my company vision is we're going to save humanity, but actually what your personal ideology is I want to be I want to be seen as an incredible executive assistant, and I want to be seen as the world's best executive assistant, then that's the mission I should focus on.
Yep.
Not the company's mission.
Yep.
And that's why you become inconsistent, because you're showing up as a chameleon to different people.
So I think self-awareness is important to how you operate. Is self-awareness something that you can practice? Do you think it's innate? Can you practice it? Can you develop it?
The only useful thing I've seen in the subject of self-awareness is having some kind of practice where you look down on yourself from a bird's eye view and look at how you've behaved, and you analyze it critically from a bird's eye view. And I think that's best done on a piece of paper. So keeping a diary and going through your day about like how you felt at certain moments, and in hindsight, with the clarity of mind, now that your amygdala is rested and you're not emotional, why did you perform in that way? What happened? And how do you wish you showed up? For me, has been the best exercise in developing my own self-awareness in every facet of my life. One such example is, up until about 25 years old, I would pursue a woman romantically, and then when she showed any interest in me, I would reject her and try and dissuade her from being interested in me. Now, I almost didn't see this cycle happening. Had I not kept a diary, and had I not started to write down what was going on every day, and then understand the patterns that were going on, and then I'd say to myself, well, what is it that's going on inside me when I feel this sort of need to reject them? Well, I feel imprisoned. And then further interrogation showed me that I picked that up from my parents, because I thought my father was imprisoned in that relationship. So anytime a woman showed interest in me, some part of my nervous system was having the same reaction I had at 7 years old when I watched their relationship. And if it wasn't for me being able to look down objectively on a piece of paper, there's no chance I would have been I've been in a relationship now for 6 years. There's no chance I'd have been in a relationship. I had to really work through it, that came from journaling. So
I wish we had 3 hours. Oh my gosh. I wish we had 3 hours. Can you have too much self-awareness? Because there's research that suggests that companies select people with sociopathic and psychopathic tendencies, which means there's an overrepresentation of sociopaths and psychopaths in powerful positions. I'm not saying 50% of leaders are sociopaths, but there's a higher representation of them in business because they know how to get what they want. They don't necessarily experience empathy in the same way. So, I mean, can you have too much self-awareness?
Can you have too much self-awareness?
It's a riddle of a question.
So on the sociopath point, I can kind of understand that to some degree. And I think people that become anomalies in life, it's logical to assume that they had some type of anomalous upbringing, some kind of trauma or early experience that's made them driven in a way that is atypical. And with that will come great motivation, great discipline, great hunger to climb the ladder, but also will come their dark side. And I remember sitting with Tim Grover, who was the coach that trained Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan, and him saying to me, like, everybody has their dark side and they have their light side, and the two are fundamentally interlinked, and your light side is probably created by your dark side, i.e. the thing that everybody claps you for is probably fundamentally associated to the thing that, you know, hurts your relationships the most. And you think about, like, me as a CEO, me being so driven in my work and in my businesses, and you saying, when I came up here, you've achieved a lot. What's the cost? Of course there's a cost, right? Because in life, everything is a trade-off.
Yep.
So that's a prime example of course there's a cost. Of course there's going to be an ongoing cost. Nothing in life, you can't just have it all. You can't nail everything.
Yep.
So
you've seen not only inside a lot of minds, but also inside a lot of businesses. Broad question, what's your take on artificial intelligence right now?
I think it's the most important technology of our lifetimes, and I don't think that's an overstatement. I think anybody not taking it seriously, however you want to define that, is putting themselves at just like a grave disadvantage. And I think particularly nation states have a huge opportunity. You know, when I was growing up, I always wished that I could have participated in the dot-com boom. Mm-hmm. Like when the internet came about, as an entrepreneur, I was like, oh my God, like I would have done this, I would have started a pet website, and I would have sold some toy, like whatever. And it's funny, because in the moment, you don't realize you're in the moment. It's only in hindsight that history goes, oh my God, that was a really significant shift. And this is where we find ourselves with artificial intelligence. We find ourselves at the very heart of a revolution.
Yep.
And people are particularly surprisingly calm, I think, based on the reality of how I think the world's going to change. Yeah. And a simple way for anybody to think about this, it's important for me to preface this by saying, when I say what I'm about to say, there'll be different segments of thinking. One type of person will think it's not true because it's causing cognitive discomfort, cognitive dissonance we call it. Another type of person might be so scared about it that they're paralyzed into inaction. And the third type of person is the person that is going to own the opportunity that artificial intelligence creates. They're going to lean in. So a simple way to think about AI is if there was two Stevens on this stage now, Mark was also called Stephen. We'll actually call it just
Call me
Mark.
Stephen.
So we got Mark here. Mark's IQ is 1,000, right? He's got a PhD level degree in every subject ever, right? Genius. And then you've got Stephen here, basically a chimpanzee. My IQ is 100, and it's very, very limited to a specific subject matter. What jobs would you give me versus Mark? Right? So who would you want to drive your kids to school? The 1,000 IQ, super genius, that can see as well, because with artificial intelligence and level 5 automation in Teslas, it can literally see. And it has less road accidents than human beings. Who would you want to teach your kid? Chimpanzee or Mark? And if you go, who would you want to, if you're in a legal case and you've got a legal issue, Mark or chimpanzee? And I can go, everyone's shouting Mark. I can go on and on and on. This is a very simple way to think about artificial intelligence. We've never seen intelligence itself, especially language, as a form of artificial intelligence disrupted. Never seen that. We've had the agricultural revolution and all of these other revolutions, but intelligence and language comprehension and all of these things just shatters the paradigm. So I'm very excited. It's a big shift, and there's huge opportunity created if you lean in, which is group 3. And leaning in just means learning, using the tools, if you can, building with the tools, but just staying close to the technology.
Perfect. Final question. So I mentioned earlier, from what I understand, 80% of the country is under the age of 30. Growing, getting everything at once. The scale of things here is incredible. Where we are right now, I was told, was built in 5 days, and then the wiring took 3 days. Yeah. I can't even understand that, because this is one building out of several buildings. It really is mind-blowing, and I'm not just saying that to flatter you. It is mind-blowing. You are able to address the future generation of this country. In less than 40 seconds, what are you desperate for them to know about being the leaders that their country will need them to be?
So there's a few things. We're going to try and hit this in 40 seconds. So my favorite quote of all time is, those who think they can and those who think they can't are both usually right. And what that essentially is saying is that believing you can do something, is a prerequisite to actually being able to. It's the story of my life. Didn't get good grades in school, didn't go to university, yet I've gotten here purely because I had this macro tailwind, which was self-belief. And your belief will be grown by the experiments you run and the failure that you're willing to endure, because all belief is evidence that you do or don't have. So all I would say is fail more. Take bigger bets, bigger risks, because that will compound both your knowledge, your feedback, but also your self-belief. And with self-belief in your tailwind, there's really very little you can't do.
Perfect. Friends,
Thank
at
you.
Impact Makers Conference,
Thank you.
Saudi Arabia, please thank Stephen Bartlett.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes,
Appreciate it.
Yes, done.
Almost 40 seconds.
Shukran.
Oh, what is that?
Perfect. Okay. This
Oh,
is for
thank you so much. Thank you.
It's a
Amazing.
trophy.
It's a trophy. Thank you so much.
You win.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
Shukran. Thank you.
Oh, gosh, it is.
Stairs.